Welcome to Off-Court Truths, where we uncover the stories that shake the legends, expose the fractures behind the fame, and reveal the moments that changed everything. By the early 2000s, Kobe Bryant had become the embodiment of a new era in basketball. He entered the league at 17 with the confidence of someone who already knew greatness was waiting for him. His work ethic was relentless, almost obsessive. His talent was undeniable. And alongside Shaquille O'Neal, he transformed the Los Angeles Lakers into an unstoppable dynasty, delivering 3 consecutive championships and igniting a global fan base that saw him as the heir to Michael Jordan. Off the court, Kobe appeared equally untouchable. He was young, charismatic, married and clean-cut, a marketable star in a league hungry for a global face. Everything about him suggested control, his discipline, his image, his poise in front of cameras. He carried himself with the gravity of someone who understood the responsibility of stardom. Sponsors lined up behind him, elevating him from a basketball prodigy into an international icon. Kids wore his jersey across continents. Corporations trusted his name with millions. The NBA placed him front and center in its vision for the future. And then, in the summer of 2003, that carefully constructed world was shattered. A single encounter in a Colorado resort became the trigger for one of the most explosive scandals in sports history. Overnight, Kobe Bryant was no longer just the next great player. He became the center of a national debate, a target of relentless media scrutiny, and a symbol of a controversy far bigger than the game itself. The balance between his public image and private life collapsed in an instant. How did a global superstar, viewed as the face of stability and discipline, suddenly find himself standing at the center of a case that threatened to destroy everything he had built? The breaking point came on June 30th, 2003, inside a luxury mountain resort in Edwards, Colorado. Kobe Bryant was recovering from knee surgery, staying at the lodge before traveling for further medical evaluation. At some point during his stay, according to reports, he encountered a young hotel employee. What happened next would become the center of one of the most heavily scrutinized cases in modern sports history. The woman later accused Kobe Bryant of sexual assault, an allegation that instantly transformed a private incident into a national spectacle. When the news broke on July 4th, it spread with the force of an earthquake. Fans were stunned. Critics sharpened their knives. The media swarmed the story, dissecting every detail with ruthless precision. Kobe, who had never faced anything close to this level of controversy, was suddenly thrust into a spotlight far more intense than anything he had ever experienced on the court. Within days, he was charged, and the case became front-page news across the United States. Every network, magazine, and talk show weighed in. It wasn't just a sports story anymore. It was a cultural lightning rod. The NBA, ordinarily quick to protect its stars, found itself in uncharted territory. The league issued cautious statements, keeping a distance while monitoring the unfolding case. Sponsors grew nervous. Some paused campaigns. Some considered pulling away entirely. The carefully curated image Kobe had built over 7 seasons, disciplined, polished, clean-cut, was now overshadowed by the gravity of the allegations against him. Kobe responded by holding a press conference, standing alongside his wife, Vanessa. His voice shook as he admitted to committing adultery, but firmly denied the accusations of assault. It was an emotional moment that complicated the public's reaction even further. Supporters pointed to his honesty. Critics pointed to his confession as proof of deeper issues. Vanessa stood beside him, offering a statement of forgiveness that softened some hearts but raised questions for others. The entire event highlighted the personal cost of the scandal, showing not just a superstar under fire, but a family suddenly thrust into turmoil. As the legal process intensified, the noise surrounding Kobe grew louder. Fans debated fiercely. Analysts speculated endlessly. Media coverage turned relentless, with helicopters, headlines, and flashing cameras waiting at every courtroom entrance. Kobe Bryant, the young hero of a global sport, was now fighting a battle against a system, a narrative, and a public judgment that could end his career before he even reached his prime. This was the spark that ignited one of the darkest and most defining chapters of Kobe's life. The early stage of the case was a storm of conflicting narratives. On one side, law enforcement presented the accusation with confidence, stating that there was physical evidence and testimony that warranted formal charges. On the other side, Kobe, through his attorneys, maintained that the encounter had been consensual. The two versions of events split the nation into camps, each convinced of its own interpretation, each fiercely vocal. Suddenly, Kobe Bryant was no longer simply a basketball superstar. He had become a symbol for broader cultural arguments about fame, power, consent, and accountability. Behind closed doors, Kobe met with his legal team, trying to understand the complexities of the battle ahead. The attorneys explained timelines, evidence procedures, and the intense scrutiny awaiting him in the courtroom. Kobe listened, often quiet, absorbing every detail with the same seriousness he once reserved for breaking down opposing defenses. But this was a different kind of pressure. There was no practice, no film study, no preparation that could truly equip him for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, the media machine grew louder. Outside the Eagle County Courthouse, reporters lined the sidewalks. Cameras clicked relentlessly. Commentators debated the case nightly on national television. Every expert seemed to have an opinion, and every rumor found a platform. In the age before social media, this story still dominated every channel. The narrative expanded beyond the facts. It became entertainment. It became controversy. It became fuel for ratings. And every time Kobe walked into the courtroom, he carried the weight of that attention on his shoulders. The Lakers organization found itself navigating a delicate line. It needed its star, but it also had to protect itself. Kobe's trial schedule overlapped with the start of the 2003-2004 NBA season, creating a surreal rhythm to his life. On some days, he would spend hours in court listening to testimonies, legal arguments, and detailed examinations of his private life. And then he would board a private jet, fly across the country, and score 30 points under the arena lights. Fans cheered like nothing was wrong. Critics watched closely, waiting for him to crumble. His teammates, caught between personal loyalty and public scrutiny, struggled to make sense of it all. The locker room felt the pressure. The franchise felt the pressure. And Kobe, even when he seemed composed, felt it most of all. The tension escalated further when sensitive court documents were leaked to the press. Details that were meant to remain confidential appeared in newspapers and on television screens. Each leak inflamed the public conversation. Each headline painted a picture that would be almost impossible to erase. People debated the integrity of the investigation. Others questioned Kobe's character. The case, which should have unfolded quietly within a legal framework, had instead become a spectacle fought on every front page in America. As the case progressed, Kobe's marriage was thrust into the harshest spotlight it had ever seen. Vanessa Bryant, standing beside her husband at the initial press conference, had made a powerful statement of support. But privately, she was navigating emotional terrain that few could understand. Their relationship, once portrayed as a picture-perfect partnership, now became a subject of public dissection. The scandal tested their resilience, their trust, and their ability to withstand a level of intrusion no family should ever face. Through it all, Kobe continued to play basketball with a focus that seemed almost inhuman. He flew back and forth between Colorado courtrooms and NBA arenas, sometimes arriving at games just minutes before tip-off. Yet night after night, he delivered performances that reminded the world why he was considered one of the most gifted players of his generation. Some saw brilliance, others saw desperation. Many saw a man clinging to the only part of his life that still made sense. Then came the turning point in the legal process. In September 2004, the criminal case was dismissed after the accuser chose not to testify. Kobe issued a statement expressing his understanding of her perspective, acknowledging that she did not view the encounter the same way he did. The nuances of that moment were significant. It was a rare instance of vulnerability, a public recognition of gravity, a careful attempt to bring closure to a case that had consumed the nation for over a year. But even with the dismissal of criminal charges, the story was far from over. The civil case that followed was eventually settled out of court, with terms kept confidential. Public reaction was immediate and divided. Supporters pointed to the dismissal as a sign of his innocence. Critics argued that the settlement complicated the narrative. Media outlets continued to revisit the case, analyzing every angle, every statement, every silence. Kobe Bryant's name would forever be tied to that summer in Colorado, no matter how the legal process concluded. Even after the case ended, its impact echoed across the league. His endorsements had taken a hit. His image had been reshaped. The NBA, its fans, and the wider culture were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about celebrity and accountability. And Kobe, who had spent his entire life mastering control, was forced to rebuild from a place of vulnerability he had never known. The scandal didn't just shake the basketball world, it redefined it. And Kobe Bryant, caught at the center of it, had to decide what kind of man he would become in its aftermath. The pressure fractured him in ways he rarely spoke about publicly. There was the guilt of betraying his marriage, an admission he made openly, a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who had built his persona on unshakable confidence. There was the fear of losing his freedom, his career, and everything he had worked so hard for. And there was the shame of knowing that his name, once synonymous with excellence, was now tied to headlines he could not escape. Kobe had always been intensely private, someone who kept emotions tucked away behind a competitive facade. But the case forced him into a spotlight that stripped away those layers. Every facial expression in court was analyzed. Every word was scrutinized. Every silence was interpreted as guilt or avoidance. It became almost impossible for him to exist without feeling judged. That sense of suffocation created a psychological weight that seeped into every part of his life, including his performance on the court. Basketball, once his sanctuary, now became a battleground where he fought to maintain a sense of normalcy. At the heart of Kobe's internal struggle was his obsession with control. He needed it to perform at the level he demanded of himself. He needed it to maintain his image. He needed it to preserve his identity. But the scandal shattered that illusion. Suddenly, no amount of practice, no amount of discipline, no amount of mental toughness could dictate what the world believed about him. The case placed him face to face with the one thing he hated most: uncertainty. Yet it was within that uncertainty that Kobe began to transform. The crisis forced him to confront parts of himself he had ignored: his imperfections, his arrogance, his blindness to the consequences of his choices. It compelled him to look inward with a harsh honesty he had long avoided. And it made him realize that the man he had been before 2003 could not survive the weight of what he was facing. What emerged was a Kobe Bryant reshaped by pain, introspection, and humility. His mindset shifted from invincibility to accountability. His emotional armor, once impenetrable, began to crack in ways that allowed growth. The scandal did not break him, but it altered him permanently. It peeled away the illusion of the flawless prodigy and revealed the complexity of a human being wrestling with guilt, fear, pride, and the desire to rebuild. This internal battle, more than any courtroom proceeding or media frenzy, was the true turning point in Kobe's life. The most defining moment of Kobe Bryant's crisis didn't unfold in a courtroom or under the glare of cameras. It happened in a quiet room far away from the noise. Just Kobe, his thoughts, and a mirror reflecting a man he barely recognized. For the first time in his life, the world around him didn't bend to his will. No amount of training could prepare him for the idea that everything he valued, his family, his reputation, his career, could vanish with the stroke of a judge's pen or the turn of public opinion. The fear was suffocating, and it forced him into an emotional confrontation with himself. He had always embraced pressure, but this was different. This was the kind of weight that made his chest tighten and his breath shorten. This was the kind of fear that turned nights into endless cycles of replayed conversations, flashbacks of the resort in Colorado, and the faces of the people he'd let down. He became a man suspended between who he believed he was and who the world insisted he might be. The relentless uncertainty carved away his confidence, leaving behind a deep vulnerability he had spent years trying to hide. The breaking point came when he stepped out of the courtroom one morning into a swarm of reporters. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones pierced the air, and voices shouted questions that cut straight through him. He paused, frozen for a moment. It was a rare mental lapse for someone who had mastered the art of composure. There was exhaustion in his eyes, exhaustion from fighting legal battles, emotional wars, and the public's hunger for judgment. In that instant, Kobe felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before, the possibility that he might not win this battle. This moment marked a shift inside him. He realized he could no longer approach this crisis the way he approached basketball. This wasn't about outworking an opponent or outsmarting a defender. It wasn't about ego or talent or pride. It was about survival, legal, emotional, and personal. And survival required humility. It required introspection. It required an acceptance that he was not invincible. For Kobe, this was the turning point. The moment where the unstoppable force finally met an immovable reality. The moment where the myth cracked and the man underneath stepped into the light, flawed, frightened, and human. It was the lowest valley of his life, but it was also the beginning of the climb that would redefine him forever. Within the NBA community, the reactions were complicated. Teammates supported him publicly, but the strain was undeniable. The Lakers organization walked a tightrope, trying to navigate loyalty to their star player while also protecting the franchise's reputation. The locker room, once united by championship success, began to fracture under the pressure. Rumors of tension between Kobe and Shaquille O'Neal intensified, feeding a narrative that the dynasty's collapse was inevitable. The team that had been unbeatable just a year earlier now felt fragile, weighed down by distractions and uncertainty. The media landscape shifted dramatically as well. Every move Kobe made was scrutinized. Every statement was dissected. The story followed him into arenas, into press conferences, into every aspect of his public life. And even after the case concluded, its shadow lingered. The whispers never fully stopped. The controversy remained woven into his name, a chapter that neither time nor achievement could completely erase. But perhaps the most painful consequences unfolded at home. His marriage, thrust into the crossfire, endured a level of intrusion no family should ever face. Vanessa Bryant's decision to stand beside her husband during the early press conference became one of the most widely broadcast moments of the year. Yet behind the scenes, the rebuilding of trust was slow and fragile. Their relationship had been tested publicly and privately, and the emotional cost was enormous. On the court, the effects were just as visible. Kobe still delivered remarkable performances, but there was a heaviness to his game during that period, an intensity that seemed fueled not only by competitiveness, but by desperation. He was playing to win, yes, but he was also playing to reclaim something far more elusive, the respect that had been stripped away during the whirlwind of accusations and headlines. Yet despite his efforts, the Lakers' season unraveled, ending in a finals loss that only deepened the sense of instability surrounding the franchise. Even years later, the 2003 case followed Kobe like a shadow. Critics cited it whenever discussions of his legacy emerged. Supporters defended him passionately. And although Kobe rebuilt much of what he lost, the scar of that summer in Colorado became a permanent, complicated part of his story, an element that shaped his journey as surely as any victory, any championship, or any iconic moment on the hardwood. In the aftermath of the 2003 scandal, Kobe Bryant faced a crossroads. The world had seen him at his lowest, and the narrative surrounding his life seemed permanently fractured. But instead of collapsing under the weight of public scrutiny, Kobe redirected that pressure into something transformative. He channeled everything, pain, fear, humiliation, and anger, back into the only place where he felt fully in control, the basketball court. There, his response was absolute. He trained harder, longer, and more obsessively than ever before. What had once been a relentless work ethic became something bordering on monastic discipline. He isolated himself from distractions, cut ties with influences that had pulled him off course, and rebuilt his life with a nearly surgical focus. The controversy had stripped away his illusions of invincibility, and in their place he cultivated a new version of himself, more mature, more intentional, and painfully aware of the consequences of every choice he made. Professionally, he began reinventing his play style and leadership. He pushed himself to overcome injuries, refined his footwork, studied opponents with an intensity that shocked even his coaches, and embraced the idea that his greatness would now be judged not only by talent, but by character. Over time, players who once questioned him began to see a shift. His teammates recognized a man who was no longer fighting for image, but for redemption, someone who understood the fragility of success and the value of accountability. The validation came not through words, but through championships. In 2009 and 2010, Kobe led the Lakers to back-to-back NBA titles, reclaiming his place among the sport's legends. These victories didn't erase the past, but they reframed it. Fans began to see him not as a fallen hero, but as a complex figure who had confronted adversity and rebuilt his legacy through resilience and radical self-improvement. The trophies, the finals MVPs, the unforgettable performances, they all carried the weight of a man who had learned, suffered, and grown. But the most meaningful transformation took place within his personal life. Kobe and Vanessa rebuilt their marriage brick by brick, navigating trust, forgiveness, and the deep scars left by the ordeal. Their unity in the years that followed became a testament to perseverance and devotion. Kobe spoke often about the importance of family, drawing strength from his daughters and dedicating himself to being the kind of father his circumstances once threatened to take from them. By the time he reached the final chapters of his career, Kobe Bryant had become more than an athlete. He became a symbol of reinvention, an example of how a deeply flawed man could rise, rebuild, and reclaim his story. The scandal didn't define him. His response to it did. And in the end, the world didn't just remember the controversy, they remembered the strength it took to rise again. Kobe Bryant's story is a reminder that greatness is never simple. It isn't built solely on talent or achievement, but on the choices made in moments of fear, failure, and vulnerability. His journey shows that even the most revered figures can fall, and that redemption isn't a gift. It's earned through accountability, self-reflection, and the willingness to grow. The scandal of 2003 became a scar he could never erase, but it also became a catalyst for transformation, pushing him to confront his flaws and rebuild his identity piece by piece. In the end, Kobe's legacy is not defined by the darkest chapter of his life, but by the strength he found on the other side of it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most pivotal moments in basketball history. If you want to explore more untold stories, shocking scandals, and the hidden truths behind the legends of the game, tell us which figure we should uncover next. Your comment could decide the next chapter we reveal here on Off Court Truths.